Pac-12 today.
You're listening to Pac-12 Today on SiriusXM Pac-12 Radio 373. Here's Jeff Schwartz and Adam Rittenberg.
Welcome back to Pac-12 Today. As we chug along here toward the end of the work week before a big weekend of Pac-12 basketball, both in the men's and the women's side. Connor Morrissette covers USC for SI. Connor, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
We know the mountain swing can be pretty tough with Colorado and Utah. USC basketball last night, 19-point win. How important is it to start off this trip with a commanding win over one of the mountain schools?
Yeah, it was huge. And watching that game last night, it was such a dominant win. It bumped up USC from 54 in the net rankings to 49. So anytime one win can bump you up 5 spots against an unranked opponent, I'd say they had a pretty good night. And USC, of course, is firmly on that NCAA tournament bubble right now. Not sure if you guys saw Joe Lunardi of ESPN, his most recent NCAA bracket predictions, but he has USC as one of those last 4 teams in. So every little bit helps. Last night, of course, beating Colorado by a wide margin, that certainly did help. And now if they can get a win against Utah, that'll be a quad 1 win, and that'll help them even more as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that jumped out to me the most about that win against Colorado, Connor, was just the overall balanced scoring. Because, as you know, USC has relied so heavily on Boogie Ellis and Drew Peterson to carry the offense for much of the year. But you had 5 players reach double figures in scoring, including Reese Dixon-Waters with 15 off the bench. How likely is it that USC can turn that into a trend here down the stretch so that they're not just relying on 2 or 3 guys, but really can get scoring from different areas of its roster to finish off the Pac-12 season strong?
Yeah, I think it's likely. Of course, Boogie Ellis and Drew Peterson, the 2 seniors, they're, of course, the best players, and every opponent will know. But Reese Dixon-Waters is the 6th man. He comes off the bench, and he's just a scoring machine. So the fact that he's back from an injury is huge for USC. If you haven't been as dialed into USC hoops as some of the hardcore fans have been, then maybe you didn't know that Reese Dixon-Waters was out for a few games, so he wasn't there when USC lost against Oregon, and then when they lost on the road against Oregon State, which is probably their 2nd worst loss on the year, up there with that Florida Gulf Coast defeat during their first game of the season. So having him back is huge because he's just automatic offense, and this time of year when the competition gets tougher and there are more things on the line, obviously, you just need as much scoring help as you can get. So the fact that he's back is huge. And then a guy, Kobe Johnson, has been really, really good for USC as well. He's known more as a role player, defensive player, but his 3-point shooting has really improved in recent weeks, and he's another key role scorer for USC after those first 2 guys. So I look at Reese Dixon-Waters and then Kobe Johnson as instrumental players for USC as they head towards a hopeful NCAA tournament bid. And I think they will get there, and I think both these players are going to be a big reason why.
I want to drill down some more on Boogie Ellis because it seems very simple, right? Like either he scores in the 20s or they lose, right? Like it seems kind of simple formula for them. How do they make sure, or how does he make sure that, that he plays well enough each week to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And recently, Jeff, he's been scoring in the 30s a couple times. So, of course, you're not going to be able to rely on him getting to 30 points every night. Yeah. I think what's really important with him is the other night a few weeks ago against Stanford, he finished with 7 assists, and that was a career high. And after the game, he was asked, hey, 33 points. He also had 33 points. He was asked about, hey, career high for you with that. What are your thoughts on your scoring output? And he just said, hey, look, I scored 33 points. That's great, but I'm more happy with the assists. And I think if he can get other guys involved, that's going to be really huge for USC down the stretch. And in terms of that clutch last shot, we've seen Boogie Ellis hit some clutch shots, but in real crunch time for the Trojans, Drew Peterson has been asked to take a lot of those shots as well. So it's not like 5 seconds left, tie game, it has to be Boogie Ellis. USC has some other guys who can take those shots in crunch time. We've seen that throughout the year, so that takes a little bit of pressure off him. But it's a good point. If he doesn't get going, USC is going to be in trouble. But I think he is good enough to consistently get 20 points as this season winds down. He's had a great last few weeks for USC. He's kind of hitting that ceiling of his on offense as we head down the rest of the year, and I think he'll continue to do that because he knows what's at stake, and he's such a fantastic player.
Connor, USC played really well defensively in the first meeting against Utah, only 22 points allowed in the second half. That was obviously at home where the Trojans have been excellent all season. Now they go to the Huntsman Center. What do you think the keys are defensively in this game to try to replicate that effort, even though it'll be difficult, but obviously help them get that first win against Utah way back in mid-January?
I think interior defense will be really important because Utah has that fantastic center who gave USC some fits earlier in the year. The thing with the Utes, and I think we saw it the other night against UCLA, they can hang with a bunch of those high-level teams, especially at home, but the guard play down the stretch is sort of a question mark. So if USC goes out and they defend the interior really well with guys like Josh Morgan, who Andy Enfield always says is one of the best defensive centers in the country, Vincent Uwachukwu, who comes off the bench for USC is a center, Kajani Wright, who's given USC some good minutes. He's their third center, but he actually plays a little bit here and there. I think that's the key. If you can slow down Utah on the interior, that gives you a great chance to win because the Utes, they have really, really fantastic inside scoring, and I think the question marks with them, like I said, are their guards. So make the guards make plays. I think that's a recipe for success.
If USC finishes strong, they're firmly in the bye for the first game of the Pac-12 tournament. Obviously, leaving them 3 games to have to win. Are they a team that's good enough, you think, to maybe string together, beating a UCLA and then beating an Arizona to be able to win the Pac-12 tournament?
I think beating both of them is very unlikely. If they did pick up a win, I think it would be against one of them. Do they have the talent to pick off both? Potentially. But I just think UCLA and Arizona, those are not only 2 of the best teams in the Pac-12, but 2 in the country. So if I had to bet on it, I mean, of course, if anyone had to bet on it, they probably wouldn't. But what's the likelihood of USC knocking off both of them to win the championship? I say it's not very likely, but could they beat one of those teams? Certainly. And we'll see USC play against Arizona again at home this time, the penultimate game of the year for them coming up on Thursday night. That'll be a good test. And, hey, maybe if they beat Arizona, then they'll shove it in my face and say, hey, Connor, we've beaten UCLA and Arizona already this year. What do you mean we can't beat them in the Pac-12 tournament? So is it possible? Yes, but I really think the team that's going to win the Pac-12 tournament will be UCLA or Arizona. They're just so much further ahead of the rest of the conference.
Connor, if you're going to build a case for USC to make the NCAA tournament, and you mentioned Joe Lunardi has them, barely in, what would be the case at this point, and then what would need to be added to the case to ensure that they get into that field?
Sure. I think the case is that they're most likely going to finish as a third-place team in a Power 5 conference, and I think USC is a little bit better than some of these bracketologists think, but making the case for them, you have to go back to the UCLA win at home when they beat a UCLA team that might be a number 1 seed by double digits. Of course, they have some losses that make you scratch your head, but if that's your ceiling, if you're good enough to beat a team that's potentially a number 1 seed, I think that's really all you need to know to get into the tournament. And like I said earlier, their losses this year, they're questionable ones. The first one, Florida Gulf Coast, Andy Enfield just said we weren't ready to go, but they didn't have Vincent Uwachukwu in that game, of course, who came back later in the year from a cardiac arrest that he suffered in the summer. And then the Oregon State game, they didn't have Josh Morgan, their top center, or Reese Dixon-Waters, their 6th man. So some of the losses look a little bit better when you have that information. So I think that's the case for them to get in. The case against them, the Pac-12 isn't very good. Say they go out, they lose to Utah. I mean, if they lose the rest of their games, they're not going to get in, but I don't expect that to happen. I think the Utah game, of course, if they win, that'll help. If they lose, I don't think that eliminates them. They take care of Arizona State at home and win a couple games in the Pac-12 tournament, I think they'll be in. But the thing that'll hurt them is weak conference, like I said, and then, of course, if they just kind of get in their own way a little bit here and lose down the stretch, which I don't anticipate. They've been playing much better basketball now that everyone's healthy, and I think because they control their own destiny, they're going to go out, take it, make the tournament. I'd be surprised if they didn't make the tournament at this point, even though it's so tight.
Which type of team would give USC fits in the tournament? Is it a bigger team, a longer team, a 3-point shooting team, a running? Like what would give them the toughest game in March Madness?
In my opinion, it's a team that would press and really make it difficult for Boogie Ellis. He's such a great scorer that sometimes as a point guard, if you put a little pressure on him, he's thinking about getting to the bucket. How can I score? That if you speed him up a little bit, he kind of goes out of control a little bit. And we saw USC, they played a great game against Arizona State on the road. They ended up winning by a comfortable margin, but Arizona State ended the game on a 16-0 run, and that's because Bobby Hurley said, hey, look, we're probably out of this, but let's press the heck out of these guys to end the game. And USC just didn't know what to do. They've struggled with pressure all year. Colorado tried it the other night. It didn't work. It was a little bit too late, but sometimes they just don't look good when you match up with them full court at times. So if I was an opposing coach and I had USC in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament or the first round of the NCAA tournament, I'd say, hey, guys, of course you can't press all game, but maybe last 5 minutes of the first half, let's throw a press at them, and then they don't adjust well, we'll bring that back in the second half. So I think quick guards and a really, really good defensive team could hurt them. A team that is really good at pressing, a team that has really smart guards, and a team that really will just defend you full court, I think could give them a tough time.
Connor, I got to get one football question in here before we let you go. Spring football is obviously coming up for USC. There's going to be a lot of intrigue for the program as a whole, obviously with Caleb Williams coming back, but the defense, what will you be looking for? How can this defense improve? Because we all saw at the end of last season, if they don't get substantially better on that side of the ball, there will be no playoff, there will be no national championship. So how does it get done?
Yeah, great question. And I don't want to say your guess is as good as mine, but for as bad as it looked last year, that's the big question. And I wrote about it earlier this week on SI.com. The offense, it could be maybe the best offense in the country, but you're not going to win a national title outscoring everyone every week. So I look at the transfer portal additions that they've brought in. Mason Cobb was an all Big 12 second-team selection from Oklahoma State at linebacker a year ago. USC, their linebacking core was brutal last year, so he'll come in. I expect him to be a plug-and-play starter, and if he can really improve that defense, I think that'll be huge. Filling in for Tuiapulotu, who is going to be probably a first, maybe second-round pick in the upcoming, probably second-round pick, actually, I should say, in the upcoming NFL draft. He was USC's best defensive player, so filling in for him is going to be tough, but they've added some other bodies in the transfer portal. So I think what's really interesting, and Adam, ESPN, I'm sure you saw this, they had that great article where they put together all that data. I forget the writer's name, but he does an excellent job. He put all that transfer data together, and he had some takeaways from it. And one that I thought was really interesting was how you can rebuild a defense very quickly from the transfer portal. And USC, they have 6 newcomers from the portal, all who are expected to play. And I think the fact that we've seen teams have success in rebuilding a defense very quickly through the transfer portal definitely bodes well for USC. So exactly X's and O's wise, what can they do different? Here we are on February 24th. I don't know if I can answer that question right now, but I think they put themselves in a position to be a lot better because of the transfer portal ads. And I think a second year with a new scheme will go a long way to helping a lot of the guys who struggled a year ago.
How do they continue, though, to build up that depth, right? Like we see the best teams in the country on that side have not just 1 and 2 players, but like 7 or 8 defensive linemen. Like that to me is the difference between really the Pac-12 defenses right now and a Georgia, which you're striving to always be. Georgia feels unlikely to happen, but how do they address the depth part of this? Like the added players, as you mentioned, in the portal, but depth.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's tough. For starters, they have to get more out of some of the guys who came in as top recruits who haven't really made an impact so far. I'm sure you guys are both familiar with Corey Foreman, who was, for a long time, a number 1 overall recruit in his class. He's going to be a junior this year on the defensive line. He just hasn't really produced, outside of one big interception against UCLA that clinched the game a year ago, the way that he was projected to. So they have a few guys like that on the team, and I think that, of course, you don't want your 5-star players to be depth pieces, but if they are, that's better than what you have been getting out of them. So I look at Corey Foreman in that way. I look at Damani Jackson, who missed a lot of time last year as a true freshman. He's a corner, didn't really break into the rotation at all, and now he will have a chance this year to play a big role at cornerback. He was a 5-star kid. I think 247 had him as the number 6 player in his class. He might have dropped maybe to 15, but he was 6 for a while. Either way, 5-star talent. Didn't really give you a lot last year. I think that can help your depth. Rajon Davis, who plays linebacker, Lincoln Riley was asked about him. He was a former top 100 kid. Didn't really get a lot of run last year. Riley said, hey, could we have played Rajon a little bit more? Yeah, probably. But when these decisions are 50-50 in practice, you got to give us 100% reason why we need to play you. So he sort of called, I don't want to say called out Rajon Davis a little bit, but he said, hey, we need to see more from you in practice. So I think that, Jeff, to answer your question, is one key area where USC could provide some depth. It's just getting more from some of those 5-star, 4- and 5-star guys who were really highly rated coming out of high school, who haven't given the team much on defense. If he can get production from that group outside of what you're bringing back, that could really go a long way, I think.
Connor, we appreciate you joining us. We enjoy your coverage of the Trojans. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much. Anytime you guys need me on, I'll be happy to join.
Thanks, Connor.
Awesome. Connor Morrissette at @C_Morrissette covers the Trojans for Sports Illustrated. What happens when you take a bunch of NFL hopeful offensive linemen to Fogo de Chao for lunch? Well, I was there today, guys. I'll let you know. Jeff Schwartz, Adam Rinberg, Pac-12 Today.